Story 1. When I moved to college my freshman year, I was assigned to one of the oldest dorms on campus. There are these massive towers that hold a lot of students, and I got assigned to the 8th floor, all the way at the top. I had 4 roommates, and since the dorm was so old, it was relatively small. We had one bedroom for all of us, one living room, and one bathroom. When I moved in, I remember thinking, something's a little off about this room, but I'm a skeptic that really believes there's a rational explanation for everything. But that dorm had some really scary shit going on. It was around spring semester when things started to get really out of hand. I had a moving trunk with a padlock on it that we used for a living room table. It was mostly used to hide our booze, but it served its purpose as a table well enough. Well, one night I woke up to this scraping sound in our living area. I went to go check it out because I had to use the bathroom anyway, and the padlock was swinging back and forth on the trunk, making the scraping noise. I thought it might have been one of my roommates, but they were all fast asleep in the room I had just left. I chalked it up to my imagination after I left the bathroom. Then a couple weeks go by and the door starts to lock itself behind us. The doors didn't have that mechanism automatically, like some doors do, and our RAs always stress that we should lock the door behind us when we leave. There were days where I would be talking to our friends across the hall and turn around to go back into our dorm, and the door would be locked. Not like a bolted lock, but like somebody was holding the handle. My roommates weren't there, or they were with me on the other side of the door. Then, the weirdest crap of all started happening. We had a window on the other side of the room from our front door, and it was the middle of winter, so we kept that bad boy shut tight and locked. Not that it could open very much anyway. 8th floor, stressed students, you know the rest. And we kept the curtain shut. Well, it's just me and my roommate talking by the front door, getting ready to go eat in the cafeteria, when the curtain opens up by itself, hangs there for a second, and gets violently torn off the bar it was on. It was like somebody forcefully ripped it off, and neither of us were near it. We both looked at each other and left in a hurry because we couldn't explain it. It is the one thing I could not rationally explain. I thought maybe a rat or mouse, but there was nothing pointing to that anywhere else in our room. Plus, it was way too violently ripped off the bar to be a rat. I still text my roommate about it every now and then, and it makes us uncomfortable to talk or think about it. The scraping padlock, which happened all throughout the semester, somebody holding the handle of our front door, and the curtain all convinced me that something was up in that dorm. I've had weird stuff happen to me, but I've always attributed it to one thing or another. These were all really freaky experiences that I still think about a lot. I've got a lot of other stories from when I was a security guard watching over a haunted Victorian-style house, but the dorm takes the cake. It's not such a large experience that affected me deeply, but it was just unsettling to feel like something was going on that we weren't completely aware of. Story 2. First off, I am skeptical about the paranormal, and I always try to find a rational explanation for things. That said, my childhood home was and is undoubtedly haunted. A bit of a backstory. The house used to have a couple apartments. One of those tenants murdered his wife in the house. He's arrested and thrown in prison for many, many years. My grandparents later moved in, remodeled, then passed it on to my mom when I was born. Here are a few encounters that stand out. The guitar incident. My brother, who was 8 and I 12, were about to go to sleep when my brother starts crying uncontrollably and saying he's scared to go to sleep. He looked and sounded genuinely so suddenly upset, and he's normally very calm. I finally calm him and we fall asleep. A few hours later, my brother wakes up crying again and gets out of his bed and wakes me up. As soon as I opened my eyes and sat up, my guitar that was hanging on the far wall, about 8 feet away, smashes against my headboard as though someone lifted it and threw it hard at my head. We both screamed, but I chalked it up to be my fault for hanging it wrong, but I knew it could not have lifted itself and then propelled itself forward. I stayed awake the rest of the night thinking of every possible explanation that could have made that happen. I used to always have vivid nightmares about a scary woman who seemed to always be in my mom's walk-in closet. She would come out at night and hurt my mom. Well, one time she was putting needles into her like a pincushion. Once she was hauntingly and rapidly punching my mom's face, but it was like my mom was made of clay, so she would get horrendously distorted. One day, my mom, siblings, and I were downstairs eating lunch when my middle sister, who was 4, comes downstairs crying hysterically and says there's something scary in Mom's closet moving the door. So my mom and I go check it out, with all siblings creeping behind me. I open the door about to go in, watching to see if there's any movement, and nothing happened. So I started to walk towards it, and the door started to move the slightest bit, and I paused. Then all of a sudden, it looked like there was a crowd of people behind that door punching with all their might to get out. The door came out of the tracks on top and bottom. The rattle noise was so loud and rapid that it was like a machine gun, and the fear I felt physically made me ill. We ran as fast as we possibly could out of that house to the neighbors. We had the neighbor go in to check if someone or something was in there. They checked it out and saw nothing but a beaten-up door off its tracks. We moved about a month later. These were only touching the surface of the many experiences we've had, from orbs to lights turning on and off, and doors locking and unlocking themselves. Story 3. This happened when I was in my early teens, probably in 2004 or so. I was living with my father at the time, who had just married a single mother who had 4 boys of her own of varying ages. The boy who was my age, let's call him Jordan, was the one that I spent the most time with while they were married, for obvious reasons. We didn't always get along, but for the most part, we were buddies. We had just signed an agreement on a new townhouse in an apartment complex, which, if you don't know, is essentially a big apartment with an upstairs and a downstairs. The house was completely empty at the time, but we had moved in anyway and hadn't brought all our stuff over yet. Our parents decided to take the little ones with them to do errands and leave Jordan and I home alone to fart around since we were older. We had a mattress and a television in Jordan's room with a Nintendo 64 hooked up so we could at least do something while we were there. Our parents drove away, and Jordan and I started playing the Nintendo to pass the time. Note that the house was 99% empty at this time. For the next part of this story, you have to understand the layout of our bedrooms. The upstairs of the townhouse had 3 bedrooms for me and my brothers. When you reached the top of the stairs, there was one big bedroom to your right. This was the little one's shared bedroom. To your left was Jordan's bedroom, and my bedroom was connected to his, meaning you had to pass through his to reach mine, which was an entirely separate room with its own door. Our parents' bedroom was at the very bottom of the stairs, a few feet away from the front door. We had shut the door to Jordan's room, the one that exited into the hallway, just for the heck of it, not for any particular reason. We were playing our game when all of a sudden, the door popped open again on its own. Well, not thinking much about it, we shrugged it and closed the door again. Yet, the door opened again on its own. It didn't bust open, it just calmly popped open, as if someone opened it and peeked their head through the crack. Jordan and I started to speculate that maybe something was wrong with the door that caused it not to shut. We repeated this process many times, getting more and more nervous each time it happened. Finally, Jordan suggested that we go downstairs and wait for our parents to get home. Downstairs, we lied down on the floor and stared out the glass back door and talked for a few minutes, discussing the possibility that wind was getting into the house somehow and pushing the door open. Not long after we started talking, we heard a hideous screeching noise come from somewhere nearby. It was loud, long, and sounded near, but from what direction, we did not know. Jordan's eyes were wide as saucers when we looked at each other, fearfully. We told ourselves it was just a neighbor using a vacuum cleaner or something. Now we were really scared, so we decided to apply some good old logic to the situation. We made double sure that all windows and doors downstairs were firmly shut and headed back upstairs. I suggested that we plug in a stand-up fan in the hallway against our bedroom and point the fan away from the door to push any wind away. Now remember, we were kids. With our plan put in place, we shut the door again and waited, standing inside Jordan's bedroom. We waited, and the door opened again. It just calmly swung open. We repeated this a couple times. Each time the door opened, we retreated to my bedroom and peered into the room to see it open. This time, we decided to put the disobedient door to the ultimate test. We locked the door from the inside. There was no effing way that door was going to open when it was locked. It just was not possible. Jordan waited while I locked it and made sure it was locked, and I returned to our position, peeking into his room. We waited a few moments, our hearts beating like mad drummers in our chests, hands shaking, watching the door closely. It opened. The door freaking opened again. I locked that damn door and it opened. Jordan and I both ran into the corner of my empty adjacent room, scared out of our minds. But we had to keep trying to shut it. We knew we did. I decided that I was going to lock it and shut it again. This happened 1 or 2 more times, me locking the door and us running away when it opened. The door popped open again, calmly but firmly like it did before. I tiptoed through Jordan's empty bedroom, approaching the door with my eyes fixated on the wide opening. I could see into the hallway. Something came through the door. I don't know what it was, but I saw it. It was big and made completely of shadow blackness. No skin, no flesh, no hide or scales. Just a pitch black form. It had 2 large, perfectly round yellow marbles for eyes. Its hands were like dinosaur claws, wide-palmed with strange long fingers, clutching the door frame and peering into the room and right into my eyes. 2 thick tendrils sprouted from his head and fell behind its back. I got a good look at it for about 1 solid second, no more and no less. A feeling of pure dread and horror filled my insides. I screamed. Jordan screamed. Before I could react, some powerful force had pushed me backwards into the adjacent room, and I found myself sprawled on the floor against the wall. Jordan was huddled over me, crying and praying frantically out loud. My memory after that is a little blurry. I don't remember what happened between then and when our parents came home. I do remember we tried to tell them the story of what happened, but in classic parent fashion, they didn't believe a single word we said. It went through one ear and out the other. I'm sure Jordan has forgotten by now as well. We moved 1 or 2 more times, and our parents divorced after only being married a few years. I've kept this story mostly to myself since. Story 4. Yes, I lived in a haunted house for 6 months in 1986. I was 15 years old. Here's the story. I moved to Michigan at 15. At the time, my father worked for an insurance company. They promoted him to Grand Rapids, and they moved us, Dad, Mom, and 3 boys, plus a dog, into a home they owned in Grand Rapids, so he could be in town and get right to work while looking for his own home. It was a split-level home with a kitchen and 2 bedrooms upstairs and a family room and 2 bedrooms downstairs. Here are some highlights of our 6 months there. The first thing we experienced was that one of the bedrooms downstairs, a bedroom with thick red shag carpet, smelled like death. My parents told my brothers and I that it was just musty, but it smelled awful, like something was dead in there. Our dog noticed too. She was absolutely terrified of the room we came to call the Red Room. She would sit outside the doorway and bark at it sometimes. She would whine and whimper until one of us went into it. She would never, ever enter the room, and she tried to attack you if you tried to drag her in. We were teenage boys. I'm not proud to say that we tried, but we tried. In the end, I shared a room with my next eldest brother. My oldest brother got his own room, my parents took a room, and we used the Red Room for storage. I share this detail because it speaks to how much we collectively were uncomfortable with the Red Room. Our first paranormal experience was maybe a week after we moved in. We were all downstairs watching TV, and we heard a loud crash, like pots and pans falling from the cabinet. Up the stairs we all ran, and nothing. Not a dish out of place. This crashing happened so regularly that we became used to it, believe it or not. There was never a gap of more than 10 days or so between a crashing incident, so much so that my parents just sort of accepted it. A crash would happen, and my mother would say, "It was just a crash, don't worry about it." The house also had some of the weirdest cold spots I have ever experienced. Areas you'd pass through where the air was like ice, immediately followed by normal air again. Sometimes you could sort of feel the edge of a cold spot. My brothers and I, of course, were convinced we were living in a haunted house. My parents were not. In fact, they took great pains to explain to us that there was nothing weird about the house at all. The crashing they explained as a furnace thing, and the dog's behavior they explained as probably the old owners used to have a dog. After a couple of months, the behavior started to escalate. Twice, we came home to find all of the chairs from the kitchen table pushed into the kitchen from the dining room. Once, we came home to find the toilet bowls in all the bathrooms completely empty. The former, my parents blamed my older brother for. The latter, my parents said sometimes it happens when the pressure on the city water line changes. My brothers and I did not agree. This was legitimate poltergeist behavior. We were convinced. My parents bought a house, and we prepared to move from our temporary home after about 5 months. That's when we saw it. My brother woke up in the middle of the night and slapped my arm to wake me. There was a person sitting on the end of my bed. It wasn't glowing or ghostly or any of that shit you see on TV. But it was also clear to me and to my brother that it wasn't really a person. I think back on what I saw a lot, and the closest I can say is that my brain knew that I was seeing something that wasn't really there. It was not transparent. I shouted, "Dad!" And as soon as I made the noise, the ghost turned to look at me and then disappeared. My dad came running up the stairs to see my brother and I talking a million miles a minute about the ghost in my room, but my father didn't believe us, and there was nothing we could do to convince him. We moved out after 6 months and into our own house. My brothers and I were elated to leave the red room and the cold spots and the crashing pans behind. That's when my father told us the truth. There's something you should know about that house, he said. I didn't want to tell you because I knew it would drive you boys crazy, but now that we're out, I guess I should tell you. The house was purchased by my dad's employer because it was on the edge of property they already owned, but they purchased it for next to nothing because it was unsellable. It had been on the market for a couple of years, but nobody wanted to buy it. Not since that boy killed himself in it. In the red room, in the basement. 4 other families lived there before the house was destroyed, all in similar temporary housing situations at my father's job. All experienced the same phenomena we did, but all of the other families knew that the house was haunted, knew that a boy had killed himself there. We were the ones who didn't know. Story 5. When my wife was young, her parents and siblings lived with one set of her grandparents. Her grandfather was murdered in the home. It happened in his bedroom upstairs. The room was used primarily as storage for the next 20-plus years. Her parents tried to sell the house multiple times, but living in a small town, everyone knew, and the house would not sell. So they stayed. Years later, and while my wife and I were engaged, there was a murder trial which I attended in support of her family. I saw the crime scene photos, which is important for later. Another few years later, we had 2 kids. The oldest was 6 at the time. My wife's family does not talk about the murder, and our kids do not know about the murder to this day. My father-in-law decided he wanted the room where the murder happened to be a hangout for the grandkids when the family was in town. He put sleeping bags and a TV in the room ahead of a holiday or a days-long get-together. We didn't like it, but stayed silent since the murder was a sore subject. My father-in-law also wanted all the grandkids to all sleep in there together. We were the first to arrive, and my son went into the room alone. He usually couldn't sit still long at that age, so after a couple of hours, I decided to check in on him. Here is our conversation. During the whole conversation, he was still and rigid and would not look away from the TV. Hey, buddy, is everything okay up here? Yeah. Okay, have fun. Daddy, do I have to sleep in here? I don't want to. Well, why not? I am not alone. Every hair on my body stood up. Well, yeah, I'm here with you, buddy. No, there is someone in here with us. Are they nice? Mean? A grown-up? A kid? A grown-up. Well, what are they doing right now? They are watching you. You have never said anything like this at your grandparents' house before, and you have been here a lot. They don't leave this room, and I have never been in here before. Well, where are they now? Without looking away from the TV, he points to the far corner where his great-grandfather was murdered and said, They are standing over there. They don't move much. Okay, buddy, you don't have to stay in here. And he left the room with me.